as we had last week. It is so wonderful to see everybody here. Because of the shortfall in last week, we suspended last week's sermon to this week. That's why your bulletin says January 27th. Just pretend. So we're doing good, but it's wonderful to have everybody here. As we follow into the book of Matthew, we hear the story of the three wise men, or magi, that come to visit, following a moving star which happens to stop right over top of the place it's supposed to be. Kevin will talk more about that. But, I'm sure Jesus had lots of visitors during the time, but the story is about the three that came bearing gifts, expensive gifts. Also, news traveled to the king of that time, too, that another king was born, and thinking in the physical terms, he got worried, got excited, being threatened. So it looks like Jesus, before he was even born, or just as he was born as a baby, still an infant, was shaking up the world, Just not going against the times, going with, what the kingdom has planned for him. He threatened the well-being of a lot of the high-ups back then, and that's probably one of the reasons why he hung on the cross, because he threatened their livelihood. But we as Christians, we learn the ways of what he taught, and during his time of preaching, and as a brother in the church, we follow the ways of Jesus. So that's the way to go. Forever, everlasting life in his kingdom. We all look forward to it. I sure do. I'm done with this life. I'm tired. But I still have things to do here, so I got to persevere and make do with it. I'm going through a troubling time right now with family, so I ask that you pray for me as I'm going through that. So, without further ado, let's turn to the book of Micah, chapter 5, 1 through 4. Now muster your troops, daughter of Judah. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they will strike the cheek of the judge of Israel. As for you, Bethlehem of Ephratah, though you are the least significant of Judah's forces, one who is to be a ruler in Israel on my behalf will come out from you. His origin is from remote times, from ancient days. Therefore, he will give them up until the time when she who is in labor gives birth. The rest of his kin will return to the people of Israel. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. They will dwell secure, because he will surely become great throughout the earth. He will become one of peace when Azariah invades our land and treads down our fortresses. Then we will rise up against him, 7 shepherds and 8 human princes. Let us sing together, We Three Kings, insert in the book. We thank you, Lord, for this gathering of our brothers and sisters to worship your name and find out more about the life of your number one Son, Jesus, who died for us that we may live forever in the kingdom that he laid before us. Thank you for this wonderful day, for the sunshine, for the warmer temperatures, and for life about us. Be with us as we travel about, as we leave this place of worship tonight, this afternoon rather. We go about our busy lives. Let us remember to spread the joy of the kingdom to everyone we know. Be with us as we hear your word about the life of Jesus and the visiting of the three kings with their gifts to the newborn baby Jesus. Bring the words that you want us to hear through Kevin. Still his heart, still his mind. Open our hearts and minds to your word through him today. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Good morning. Came outside this morning, it was 24 degrees, felt downright tropical.
Yeah, really.
This afternoon, I'm going to turn the air conditioner on, it's going to be over 40 degrees, I don't know how to act.
Wait till Tuesday, it'll be a heat wave.
We got to break out the grill. Memorial Day's coming early. Well, apparently the groundhog did say it's going to be a short winter this year.
I should leave the poor guy alone, you know?
I always hate when people wake me up from a good nap.
Yeah, really.
Well, at any rate, good to see you this morning. We're going to continue our journey through Matthew. One of my favorite, I can't say Christmas hymns, but Epiphany hymns, is We Three Kings. For a long time I thought that there were three kings because of the song, but no, that's not the case. In the Western Christian tradition, we've assumed that there are three kings for centuries, back into the 3rd and 4th century, to be honest. So it's not a new notion that there's three, but the Bible doesn't actually say there's three. The Bible says they brought three gifts. And today we're going to look at some of this. We're going to maybe challenge some of our preconceived notions a bit and see where God takes us. Would you turn with me to Matthew 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law together, he asked them, "Where is the Christ to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I may go and worship him also." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and they saw the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them, and it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child was with his mother. They bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Divining the future has always been one of the activities of humanity. It's not uncommon even today. If you've ever tried to guess lottery numbers, you've tried to divine the future. If you've predicted a winner for today's Super Bowl, you have attempted to divine the future. My guess is you have not used the entrails of an animal to accomplish that task. I doubt anybody consulted the stars to make their predictions. We may have done it in a slightly more technical fashion, looked at statistics, analyzed patterns, and so on and so forth. But the truth is, we're attempting to divine the future. People have done this for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. This is nothing new. In the ancient world, it was a common practice to look at the stars and try and figure out what was to come. And some of those who made observations of stars were very, very talented in what they did. In Babylon, they could predict the rising of the moon. They could predict eclipses, both solar and lunar. They had centuries of data and were able to accurately predict the rising and the setting of stars and planets. Even by modern standards, they're fairly accurate. People have looked at the stars for a long time. We have created the zodiac, and we tell stories from the shapes we see in the stars. Now, I realize you and I, we live in a world where there's lots of light pollution. You go out at night and you see a few stars. If you go to a place that's truly dark, here in Pennsylvania, the place to go is Cherry Springs State Park. If you're there at night, the sky is littered with stars. It's a phenomenal thing to see. Go to Williamsport, make a left, up in that general vicinity. It's incredible what you can see. The stars are so vibrant and bright because there's so little light pollution. We've looked at the stars for a long time. In the ancient world, they assumed that the stars had something to say about what would happen to us. Have you ever said, "Thank your lucky stars"? That's where it comes from. Ever read your horoscope in the newspaper? Same thing. This has been around for a long time. There's nothing new about it. In this case, after Jesus was born, we know he's born in Bethlehem, in Judea. Stone's throw from Jerusalem, they're not far away. When Herod was the king, this is important to note because, this tells us that our calendar's off by a few years. Herod died in 4 BC. So we're really not in 2019, it's really 2015. So just if you want to update your calendars, feel free. Everyone else is going to be confused if you do that. I wouldn't suggest it, but just so we know what's going on. Actually, it might have been closer to 6 BC when Jesus was born, but that's just sort of the way it goes. Herod's the king, and then these magi, wise men, astrologers, astronomers, suppose we're telling a story, they'd be wise guys, show up and say to Herod, "Where's the king that was born? We've come to see him. We saw his star in the east and we've come." Herod was honestly a bit confused. Because if there's a new king born in the city, it typically means it's from the line that is currently in power. And, I'm guessing Herod checked with his wife. "Did you have a baby sometime that you didn't tell me about?" Maybe checking his granddaughter. I don't know. He, not expecting this. It's kind of like when you're expecting a delivery from Amazon, it shows up a day early. It's like, ooh. But this is sort of in a bad way. It's like, wait a second, this is not good news. We don't want this to be happening. Now, Herod was a skillful politician. He navigated the change in power in Rome from Caesar through the first triumvirate into, what's his name? Augustus Caesar. This involves civil wars in Rome that stretched from Italy to Egypt. And you know, the early stages of the war, Herod was on the winning side, but the winning side wasn't the side that won at the end. Mark Antony, Cleopatra, he was a buddy of theirs. But when Augustus becomes emperor, he is now a friend with him. He was politically astute, and he was vicious. I'm not going to paint this guy into a nice picture, because he was a vicious man. As I told people in Sunday school, my favorite story about his political means for dealing with opponents, he invites all his enemies to one big banquet to bury the hatchet, and then he does, in them. He invites everybody and kills them all. What a way to get rid of your enemies, right? Very efficient. This is how Herod operates. So he's in his palace, he's relaxing, he's comfortable. 3 dignitaries from the east show up. And they say, hey, we've come to pay homage to the new king. Where is he? And Herod says, I don't know what you're talking about. This is going to be a problem. Because Herod does not want competition for the throne. He likes running his country the way he runs it. He doesn't want to share power. He doesn't want to give to somebody else. I mean, this man has been known to kill wives and children because he didn't like the way they behaved. Didn't think they would be good heirs for the throne, so he eliminates them. This man is ruthless, he is calculating, and he is intelligent. He has just been informed he has a new adversary. He's not going to play around. The 3 men that throw up, well, in our tradition, the 3 men, Belshazzar, Gaspar, and Melchior. That's the names we've given them. Honestly, I can't tell you if that was really their names or not. Now, if you look through old church records, you can actually find that there have been churches built for each of these saints. And some of them would have contained relics of those saints. Now, is it possible those were their real names? Yes, it is. Bible never says that, though. Bible never says there were 3, just that they brought 3 gifts. We assume 3 wise men because there are 3 gifts, but there's nothing that says that there weren't 10 of them that pulled their resources to get good gifts and brought them. In fact, the Syrian tradition holds that there were 24. And there are other traditions that say that a family line held stories of the Messiah that was coming from the time after the flood. There are all kinds of stories about who these men really were. And you know what? I honestly have no idea who they were. All that I know is they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Outside of that, I can't really tell you anything about them. Now, why mention the kings, the wise men, the magi in Matthew's gospel? One of the things Matthew does is he helps us to understand how the Bible works. He draws together quotes from the Old Testament and tells us how the early church understood who Jesus was from the scriptures of the Old Testament. So if you look at Psalm 72, verse 11, there's a little line that was important. And it says, "May all kings fall down before him," referring to the Messiah. Regardless of who they were, Matthew is telling us that people beyond the family of Abraham have recognized that a significant person has been born. Now, what did the wise men, the Magi, understand about Jesus? That's something we'll get to in a little bit. They arrive in Jerusalem at some point after Jesus is born. The number of the Magi are not stated by Matthew. He only tells us they brought 3 gifts. They went to Herod, assuming that the new king would be a descendant of his. That would be my assumption. That is not the case. Herod does not know who this king is. Now, the NIV says that they came to worship him. In Greek, this is the word prosukio, and it can be translated as worship or homage. They came to worship him or they came to pay him homage. Now, how do we know which way to translate it? Well, if this word is applied to a deity, you translate it worship. If this word is applied to a human being, you pay him homage or her homage. It doesn't really help us, does it? Trying to understand what the wise men knew, they knew he was important, needed to be recognized, but did they understand him to be a god or simply a king? Well, if I could answer that question for you, I could correct every Bible translation that's ever been done on this. Unfortunately, I can't. But what it does do for us is tell us that we get to wrestle with this a bit. Just what did they understand about Jesus? Did they realize he was divine? Did they realize that he was a new king? The church traditions are full of stories about what the Magi, the wise men, understood. But what does that really tell us? Well, it tells us at some point, people are wondering the same question. What did the wise men know about Jesus, and when did they know it? Nothing new here, okay? People have wondered, did they realize he was divine, or did they simply think he was the next king? See, now, when we hear the word Messiah, we instantly think the Son of God. However, the word Messiah, or a more literal translation to Greek would be Christos, the Anointed One, was something that was applied to the King of Israel. The Anointed One was simply a way of saying God's chosen king. It does not necessarily imply divinity. To say at one point that David is the Anointed One is absolutely appropriate. It does not mean that he was semi-divine or divine. He was simply a man. The line of kings coming from David were all anointed. Each one of them would have been appropriate to refer to as the Anointed One. As you move into thinking about what's going on here, if they've come to see the Christ, the Anointed One, they've come to see the King, doesn't mean they're looking for a divine figure. Now, it could, but it doesn't necessarily apply that. And that's the difficult thing. I want to say they understood, because it makes the story much more meaningful that way. But it's just you and I making a guess about what is actually the case. And at this point, it's even hard to say we're making an educated guess. It's just a guess. You're going to be just as, we can put a dartboard in the wall, and put a line down the middle, divine, not divine, throw darts, pick the best out of 10. That's going to get us close to the truth as anything else, unless the Holy Spirit gives us a revelation here. You can do the same thing for the football game this afternoon. Who's going to win? You're going to have to be just as accurate as you will trying to determine whether or not the Magi understood Jesus was divine enough. Well, what can we know? Well, verse 3 picks up, when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, or as it says in the ESV, alarmed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. Now, why is Herod alarmed? Well, he's had 3 guys, at least, maybe more, show up on his doorstep, say, hey, we've come to celebrate the birth of the new king. Where's the party? Herod's saying, there is no new king. There is no party. Why are you here? But we saw the star. We know this has happened. Where's the king? Herod doesn't know anything about this. Why is he alarmed? Because there's another claimant to the throne. Herod, he's not Jewish. Remember that. He simply married into the family of the previous dynasty to give his claim to the throne legitimacy. He is powerful, he is crafty, he is intelligent, he is a skilled politician, he is a good war leader. But you know what? At the end of the day, he is not recognized as Jewish. So to be a king of Judea and not be Jewish, that's not satisfying for a lot of people. Now, he's done a lot of things to try and satisfy people. One of those was his great building project, the temple in Jerusalem. It is listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was said to see one of the most striking things you could see in the ancient world was the sun rising on the temple in Jerusalem. It was to be an incredible sight to behold. This is what Herod did to prove to the people of Jerusalem and Judea that he was indeed committed to being Jewish. He went through a lot of efforts here, because you realize to enter certain parts of the temple precinct, you have to be a priest. So if you're going to build in the temple precinct, you have to be a priest. So if you're a stonemason, they can't just wave a wand over and make you a priest, because you're not descended from Aaron. So what he did is he literally had Levites trained as stonemasons so they could build in the temple precinct in places where workmen could not go. This man spared no expense to say, I'm here, and I am part of this community, but there's always this undercurrent. He's not from the line of David. He's not Jewish. He's a pretender. And now, there are a group of men that have showed up at his house and said, we saw his star in the sky. We know that the king of Judah has been born, and we have come to pay homage to him. What's Herod thinking as a politician? I got to stop this before it becomes a civil war. Why is all of Jerusalem alarmed with him? Well, truth be told, things under Herod were pretty good for the upper class. Trade was flourishing, properties were gathered, he was making money, they were making money. It was stable. The Romans were at bay, the Greeks were gone, Jewish people were running the things in the temple, and Herod, while he may not have been Jewish, at least he was local and did a nice job of pretending to fit in. Things were pretty good. I mean, how would you feel if you found out there was going to be a civil war here? Would you be a bit alarmed? No different for the people living in Jerusalem in the first century. A rival claimant to the throne, someone from the line of David. All that religious fervor will be piled up behind him. And what's going to happen? Rome's going to come. So Herod asked the chief priests, teachers of the people, where is the Messiah Anointed One. They respond, verse 5. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Babylon, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. So, it's Bethlehem. This is where the anointed king is to be born. So he tells the wise men. He doesn't secret. He pulls them aside and says, hey guys, Bethlehem's the place. Not too far from here. Go make a diligent search. Check out, find out where this kid is, and after you're done worshiping, let me know so I can come and worship him too. Or pay homage. I doubt Herod thought that Jesus was divine. So he sends them on their way. They go and they look. Verse 7 talks about calling him. Verse 9. After they heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Now Herod asked them when the star appeared. Why did he ask them when the star appeared? Well, to give a rough estimate of when the child was born. How old is he? How long has he been here? Why haven't I heard about this? All these kind of questions. He wants the intelligence to know what he's supposed to do with this. When it appeared, and he sent them to look. Now something kind of interesting happens. The star they saw, the star that they followed, told them to make their way to Judah, Jerusalem. It moved. And it stopped over the place where the child was. Anyone here ever try to navigate by stars? I haven't either. Truth be told, I wouldn't have the first idea how to go about it. I understand a compass. I know how that works. I get from point A to point B with a compass. I'm all right. But looking at the stars and trying to navigate, honestly, I don't always remember which one's the North Star and I'm supposed to follow to go north. Just not a means of navigation that I understand. When I was living in Western Ohio, people do this all the time. Well, you're going to go north on this road, then you're going to west. Don't do this to me. Just tell me left or right. This is not the way I learned directions growing up. In Western Pennsylvania, there's not a road that runs north, south, east, west. There's some that run north and south at the same time, if you know what I mean. But what I do know about stars is that they tend to stay in their places. I mean, once you know where to find the North Star, it's there if you're in the right season. Now, planets will move some, but they're not going to lead you from Babylon to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, and then park over a house. Stars don't do that. Just not the way that they work. Honestly, I don't know what it was that the Magi saw. Was it indeed a star that God had moving uniquely? Could be. Was it an angel with a flashlight? Could be. I have no idea. All that I know is it took them from point A to point B, and that point B was in Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem, they went into a house. Now I realize when we set up for Christmas, we don't put up a nice little house. We set up a barn. And we put animals in the barn. In fact, we sing hymns that include lines about the cattle lowing. But if you look in Matthew and in Luke, you know what you don't find mention of? No barn, no animals. I know. Your manger scene is now empty. We've removed the barn, put it in an apartment block. It's a whole lot less Christmassy, I get it. The closest we get to animals is that there was a manger for a bed. And as I've told you before, and I will say again, camper that we had when I was a kid, the dining room table dropped down and became a bed. It was repurposed because there was limited space for people to sleep and people to eat. Couldn't have both at the same time. Well, I mean, you could, but Cheerios on the bed just doesn't work well. So you raise the table for the day, you put it down at night, it works. Small house, the typical house in ancient Palestine would have been rectangular, think a shoebox. Back third to back half for living space, front 2/3 or half for animals. Back is probably raised 6 inches to a foot maybe to keep the spaces separate. So, do you think you might repurpose a feed trough for a bed if that's all you've got to work with? Sure. I had friends, when their daughter was born, she was born a little early, they hadn't had a crib yet. You know what they used? A dresser drawer. They closed it when she cried, it worked really well. I'm kidding, they didn't close the drawer. But they repurposed something that was handy to make a safe place for the child to sleep. I mean, this happens all the time. Have you seen those really bizarre pictures about the baby cages that used to go on apartment windows? Anybody seen those pictures? Yeah, this metal cage that you put on the outside of the window that you can put a kid in so they get fresh air to get out of the apartment. Yeah, I don't know how commonly they were used. I've only seen a couple pictures. You got time this afternoon, Google it. You'll. Yeah. We do strange things. Repurposing a food trough for a place for a baby to sleep is probably not as strange as it sounds. Now, when the Magi arrive, they go into a house. And in that house, they find Mary and they find the baby. It's not as if anyone else was there. There's no mention of Joseph. There's no mention of cousins. But typically speaking, in ancient Palestine, families tended to live together in compounds. Several houses built together around a common courtyard where they would have shared water supplies, baking ovens, those kind of things. They would have shared labor. Most people didn't have enough livestock to manage as one big herd, so you would put them together. This was very common kind of stuff. So when they did get there, they probably came into a compound, and in that compound found a house that wasn't probably just Mary and Joseph. There may have been other family members living there as well. And depending on the time of the year, they were up on top, as well as living inside. They had multiple living spaces, both inside and outside. Now I realize this isn't nearly as romantic as the way that we typically tell the story. But this is more likely what the Magi found. I know every time we've done a Christmas pageant, the Magi show at the same time as, or just a little after the wise men. But the truth is, the wise men got there the day Jesus was born. Sorry, the shepherds got there the day Jesus was born. The wise men may have showed up as much as 2 years later. I don't know actually how long it was. It was not the same day. That I'm pretty clear about. But I mean, if we do Christmas pageant, we can't have people come back at the conclusion of the pageant 2 years later. That just doesn't work. So we put it together, but what it does is it rewrites the story in our brains. So when we tell the story, when we think about the story, anybody else picture people in bathrobes with staffs? Yeah. I mean, I know growing up, the only time my dad's bathroom was ever used is when I needed it for the play at church. That's just the way it worked. But as we retell the story this way, we push things together in a way that it just didn't happen. Now we do that with stories all the time. The picture of Washington crossing the Delaware, the men aren't rowing with their rifle butts. They're pushing the ice floes away. You know, but as you tell the story, it looks like they're rowing with their rifles, but they weren't. We get this stuff mixed up with something that close. Can you imagine how much we've distorted the image of the story of Jesus' birth? The common manger scene, do you know who provided that innovation to the church? It was Francis of Assisi. Before St. Francis, there was no manger scene. That was his interpretation of the story. He received special dispensation to bring livestock into the church to tell the story. It was a huge hit. In fact, it still impacts the way we tell the story today. The wise men, they came in, verse 11, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him, and they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, or gold, incense, and myrrh, it says here. They bowed down and worshipped him. Does that tell us what they understood? No. Do you know how you would pay homage to a king in the ancient world? You would bow down in front of him. I mean, we still do that, right? Has anyone seen a curtsy or bow? Lowering your head below that of the person that you're giving respect to. That's what this was. And the further you went down to the ground, the more respect you were giving them. So when you came before a potentate in the ancient world, you touched your head to your forehead to the ground as a means of saying that this person is much greater than I am. Now, did that mean that you were worshiping this human being? No. It just meant that you were paying homage. Now, one of the ways that people would worship a god in a place of worship, they would bow down and touch their forehead to the ground. You still see this in various religious traditions today. This is nothing uncommon. So in the ancient world, how do you know the difference between worship and homage? Well, it's the person who's receiving the attention, or the god who's receiving the attention. So does this really tell us what's going on? Unfortunately, no. What did they understand? They understood he was important enough to receive very expensive gifts.